Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to your morning briefing for Friday, the 15th of August, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Happy Friday to everyone. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway with Robert. Let's start here with these Russian hackers on these federal court networks. How bad is this, Robert?
Good morning, Mike. So this dropped last week, and there has yet to be a determination of when this hack actually began, when these Russian government-backed hackers actually gained access to all of these federal court networks, or how long they've been on these networks. But there are some people that are familiar with the investigation, speaking on background, said that they have been on these networks for at least multiple years and stolen sensitive documents. And before this hack was reported last week, and according to some of the in the investigation, some of the documents that were reviewed by I believe by Bloomberg, the evidence does point to a Russian state-sponsored hacking group that used stolen credentials to access this network for at least multiple years.
And then, so they're getting communications between judges. What exactly are they able to siphon off of here?
So, basically anything that comes across the network. But according to what's known so far, they were specifically targeting indictments and like sealed indictments around espionage cases and cybersecurity cases.
Interesting. So they may have gotten an inside look on the evidence that the United States has on Russian, potentially other foreign spies, correct?
Correct.
Interesting. All right. All right, let's move on here to a second big, beautiful bill. What in the world?
Yeah, House Speaker Mike Johnson said yesterday he's planning another big bill. He's calling it Reconciliation 2.0 when Congress returns from its August recess. He's planning it to pass it this fall at some point. He didn't give a specific date, but he did also say he's planning a third reconciliation bill for next spring. So it looks like that's how the Trump administration is going to get its legislative priorities through over the next 2 years.
Okay, so these will be updates, maybe some more funding cuts over here, maybe adding to some budgets over there. Is that basically what these will be?
Correct.
Okay. Also, so House Speaker Mike Johnson went on recess early to avoid Democrat action trying to force a vote on releasing the Epstein client list or the files that don't exist, whatever they are. Have you seen anything from Democrats that say they're going to obviously not give up here, but they're going to continue to push for a vote, something like this, when the August recess is over?
Yeah, they're either the House, both Rep. Massey, Thomas Massey from Kentucky, and Ro Khanna from California. So it's a bipartisan discharge petition. Basically, they're going to try to force the House to vote on a bill to release the Epstein files when they come back from recess.
All right. Any chance of that passing?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to Alligator Alcatraz lots of 2.0s, but this is a second Florida ICE facility. What's the latest?
So yesterday, Governor Ron DeSantis announced a second emergency immigration detention center here in Florida, and he called it Deportation Depot. This is actually going to be in Baker County here in Florida near Jacksonville, and it's at a vacant correctional facility that that basically shut down due to a lack of personnel hiring issues a few years ago. And they said they're going to house 1,300 detainees at this facility once it's complete.
Okay. Ron DeSantis is creating like a Disney World ecosystem, but for deportees. It's like, wait, where are you going? Which one are you going to? I'm going to Deportation Depot. Spend some time there. All right. And then finally, let's move on and talk about this DOE, these commercial reactors real quick.
So yesterday, Department of Energy announced that they're going to work with 11 reactor projects. This is part of a reactor pilot program. The idea behind this is to unlock private funding and provide a fast track for getting commercial licensing to these small reactors. This is, I think, a follow-on to we talked about the DoD investing in that MP Materials Critical Minerals project in California, and I think the Trump administration is going to start doing more things like this, like investing public capital in order to get private capital, incentivize private capital funding.
Okay. And then is there any word on where these 11 commercial nuclear reactors will be?
I didn't see the locations.
Okay. All right. Let's maybe figure that out. All right. Thanks for that. And let's go ahead and move on here to the global sit rep. Jared, good morning. Start here with the artillery production, kind of a big deal. The Army, we can talk about shooting munitions, but they've got to be replaced. So what's the latest here?
Yes. So the Army opened a new artillery shell production plant in April in Arkansas. And now that plant's going to run alongside the two that are already operational in Pennsylvania. They've been operational for ages. The Arkansas plant is producing, it's currently producing, but they have an undisclosed amount of shells per month. They are projected to make 50,000 shells per month once they achieve full operation. So they've got the stuff there. They're just, getting it certified, getting it ready to run. So they're going to hit 50K. The Army expects to double this output in that single plant with additional upgrades as well. So they're going to hit 100,000 shells per month out of a single plant in Arkansas. Now, the Army stated goals over the last couple of years has been to achieve 100,000 shells per month by 2025. So they have likely hit it with the one already producing half of that. And they're about to hit that goal overall. But I think I want to bring some perspective into this. In 2021, the Army produced an average of 14,000 shells per month. If this technology that they're sure is going to put out 50,000 shells per month is in every plant, then in 4 years, the Army has increased its artillery production tenfold.
Mm-hmm. All right. Just to put this into perspective here. So they wanted, what, again, 100,000 a year is the goal?
No, 100,000 per month.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, that's messed up. Thank you, Jared. 100,000 a month. All right. So to put that into perspective here, these are 155s, correct?
Yeah.
I'm assuming. Okay. 155 millimeter artillery shells. Ukraine at one point was expending about 10,000 a day. So it seems like if the Army is able to meet this production, that I think Ukraine's use of artillery shells is a pretty good baseline for maybe what we would use in a conflict. So it seems like this is going to be fairly sustainable. I mean, we've got to get them over there. And we're talking about the Indo-Pacific here, presumably. We got to get them over there. But at least in terms of production, I don't know how much the Army is planning for if we do get into a conflict. But I would imagine, well, I don't know. I would have to ask somebody. But Jared, is 100,000 a month, is that what the Army is going to need? And does the Navy fire 155 guns, or what do they have? I don't even know.
No, they use different okay. shell. We call it 5-inch. Which is not that. But who knows? We may see a rapid development to a crossover. And I will be perfectly upfront here. Even if let's say they do hit that 100,000 in a single plant and then they just upgrade all the other plants, that would basically be the only way they could get ahead of the curve for supplying Ukraine. Because Ukraine, from what I was finding, was about 6,000 shells per day, which amounts to 180,000 per month. So what the Army is doing is not enough. They are still planning more, but I think if you take that perspective, you lose sight of the fact that the Army has very likely increased its shell production by tenfold in 4 years, which is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and listen, I can do the math. I guess I should have completed the thought. And the thought is that the Army's use of artillery shells in the Indo-Pacific will probably not be as high as Ukraine's use, because Ukraine is a land conflict. The Indo-Pacific will predominantly be a naval conflict. Obviously, the Army's going to be shooting 155s at whatever they can. So I would not expect the usage rate to be as high in the Indo-Pacific as in Ukraine. I could be wrong. But, Jared, last observation or thought on that, we'll move on.
No, I've completed.
Okay, great. Let's move on to Paraguay, and I'll let you take it from there.
Sounds good. So that's coming right from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He signed a safe third country agreement with Paraguay and the Paraguayan foreign minister. Now, per the State Department, the U.S. is deepening cooperation across security, diplomatic, and economic fronts with Paraguay under the current Paraguayan administration. And the reason the safe third country agreement even matters is that that's one less internationally recognized reason for somebody to move. They have a country they can go to that's not the United States. this tamps down on immigration. The Navy is also reported to have deployed assets against cartels. This is coming from anonymous sources speaking to Reuters. They say that the Department of Defense deployed air and naval forces, no further elaboration, to the Southern Caribbean to address threats to the U.S. national security from specially designated narco-terrorist organizations in the region. So cartels. I haven't been able to find what assets were deployed. I will say this is not the first time that we have likely seen Second Fleet assets, so your North Atlantic assets, shift down to South America. They were helping with that for immigration purposes on the other side of Mexico. We reported on that. But this is the first time that I've seen it attributed directly to counter cartel operations.
Okay, so these could be ISR drones doing ISR reconnaissance missions, trying to find drug labs, trying to find where these cartels are hiding out in the mountains or what?
Could be. I think the naval forces part of this is particularly important because that means you're probably talking about a destroyer and or a littoral combat ship and not just Coast Guard, because normally it's the Coast Guard that handles that.
Mm-hmm. All right. What would a U.S. destroyer be doing looking for cartels off the coast of Mexico?
They have all the same capabilities as the Coast Guard, but they can also they can attribute much more fire to it if they need to. Turning one of the 5-inch cannons onto any kind of drug boat is going to just annihilate it. But also you get many more sensors attached to it, so you can actually pick up things that the Coast Guard probably can't. There's different missions that the Navy has that would be applicable to this. There's also been quite a bit of drone integration with the Navy. So we may see that, you actually have more quadcopter drones available on this ship than what the Coast Guard can put out. Frankly, without more information on what kind of naval assets were assigned to this, I cannot tell you. I can only really speculate. I just know that the destroyer is basically the backbone, so it's probably that.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then again, this was on the Caribbean side, not
Yes.
on the Pacific side. Okay.
Yes.
In the Gulf of America or near. Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jared. Let's move on to the Philippines.
All right. So this is coming from the Philippine ambassador. He said on the sidelines of an economic conference over in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, that he's discussing the deployment of more U.S. Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction Systems. These are, first off, they're called Nemesis, but they're anti-ship missile launchers. The Marine Corps already has a couple that are over there. He's wanting to get more over in the Philippines. I think that's entirely plausible that he didn't provide any additional details. It was basically an offhand comment, but it's notable. Hey, we're getting I'm trying to get more forces from the U.S. here to the Philippines, and that's a specifically counter-China mission. Mm-hmm. Moving across the Luzon Strait over to Taiwan. As part of its porcupine strategy, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense revealed several weapon systems yesterday. One of those includes a loitering munition. Typically, we call those suicide drones. Now, the suicide drone here, it's a fixed wing, low visibility, low payload, mass-produced weapon. That last part is the most important. Taiwan's going to make a lot of these things, just like they do for everything, for all of their cheap weapons. Now, suicide drones aren't meant to kill ships outright. What they're meant to do is complicate the picture. So you throw in a few of these along with a few other conventional anti-ship missile weapons, and suddenly you get a much harder anti-ship missile defense picture. China's going to have a harder time with this, especially if Taiwan actually does succeed in mass producing these. And then moving over to Europe, the Deputy Prime Minister of Poland announced yesterday that the country's security services foiled a cyber attack on a large city's water infrastructure. He refused to say which large city it was so he wouldn't cause panic. But he did say that the attack would have left the city completely without water, did not give a timeline on restoring water. And as of yet, since this was just revealed yesterday and stopped yesterday, they don't have any kind of public information on who the perpetrator was. We could assume, but we don't even know if it was state or non-state yet.
Sure. All right. Great. Well, thanks for that, Jared. And let's move on. Big weekend. There's a national day of protest. Robert, what's it called? Stop the Trump Takeover?
Correct.
That's what it's called.
Yeah, this is 200 protests, and this is being put on by a progressive nonprofit called Public Citizen, which they announced this for tomorrow. And it's going to be over 200 events across the U.S., and it's being co-hosted by a slew of pro-Democrat and progressive activist groups, including the Democratic National Convention and Indivisible. And they also said they're planning a Workers Over Billionaires Day of Action for Labor Day, and they're expecting over 2,000 protests on the 1st of September.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the next big push from Indivisible. Honestly, 200 protests is way on the low side. We saw earlier this year 800, 1,000, 1,500 different protests on these national days of action. So not swinging for the fences this weekend. But Labor Day, 1st of September, that weekend, sure, 2,000 2,000 individual protests across the country. Absolutely achievable. They've done that before. All right. And then, Robert, I assume most of this National Day of Protest is going to be about like the rest. A lot of these protests are going to be relatively small, like 10, 15 people, last maybe a couple hours. And I've not seen the kind of enthusiasm in the buildup to this as I've seen for previous ones. So I wonder if this is going to be another lackluster day of protest.
Well, based on the past, the No King stuff, I also expect the age to skew a bit higher than average. I think that, pointing to some of the polling over the last couple of months, I think that's due to this partisan, sort of the partisan split has kind of flipped, where the younger age groups, according to some of these opinion polls coming out in the last 6 months, are skewing much more conservative politically, whereas the older demographics are skewing much more liberal in opinion polling. So it seems like that dynamic, where a few years ago you would have had much younger people coming out for protests put on by like liberal and progressive groups, are now not, and that dynamic is flipped.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. As a reminder, we track these protests and also these far left direct action demonstrations, which historically produce riots. We track that every day on our protest and riot tracker that is available on the Forward Observer watch floor. Head over to forwardobserver.com, free 7-day trial. Check it out. And if you do have a protest, I'm going to start work on this. I encourage people to go and observe these protests for a handful of reasons. Number one, you really have to understand at the local level what you will be dealing with in the future, because the organizers, they want these protests to grow in size and intensity. This is what they're working towards. Remember, they run on this 3.5% rule, which is, according to at least one study by Erica Chenoweth, there is no, they call them regime. Okay. There's no regime or dictator or any autocratic or authoritarian power that survives when you have 3.5% of a country out actively protesting and engaged in direct action demonstrations. It takes 3.5% of a country. They say that is their ultimate goal. That's about 12 million Americans. I think at the highest, they've probably put out maybe like 3 million. So they're building up into 2025. And on that topic, yesterday at 2 p.m., I did a members only Color Revolution briefing. I talked about color revolutions so you can understand what they are, identify the hallmarks, talked about the big picture strategy that started back in November of last year after President Trump was elected, and then going into the big picture strategy through 2028. Talked about escalation. How does this escalate? Where does it go from here? Where are we now? Where is it headed ultimately? What are we probably going to see? And then I talk about my latest forecast for this year and next year heading into the midterms. And then after the midterms, we are going to turn a corner. This protest movement is going to turn a corner. I talk about what that looks like in 27 and 28. And then 2029 really hinges on who wins the presidential election in November 28. Maybe that takes a while. But January 29, we'll see. It's open-ended, TBA. If you'd like to get access to this, it is up on our watch floor. Just click the link that says Color Revolution Briefing. It's just over an hour long, and I spill everything. I talk about the big picture strategy, the tactics, why this works, why this has been more successful in insurgencies abroad, why this strategy is being pursued. And if you'd like access to that and also all future updates, become a Forward Observer member. Support our mission. This is what we do so that no one is surprised when we actually do start to see the pivot here. And with that, let's go ahead and talk about one thing that is going to accelerate this protest movement, potentially, eventually, into a national resistance movement, and this is gerrymandering. Robert, take it away.
So yesterday, California began its redistricting process in earnest. Governor Gavin Newsom announced the beginning of a campaign for this new mid-decade congressional map. And so the state Democrats in California, they need to finalize basically a resolution or a piece of legislation to call for this special election by August 22nd. And they will be back from recess in 3 days, so on Monday. There have been a couple of groups that have come out to support this effort in California. One of them is a nonprofit called Common Cause, which would normally oppose partisan gerrymandering. That's one of their major pillars of their organization, and they have said that the quote from them was interesting to me because I think this goes to the thinking of most or all of the Democratic Party. They said a blanket condemnation in this moment would amount to a call for unilateral political disarmament. Do you think Newsom and California Democrats are facing an uphill battle? There was that recent Politico Citron Center poll that showed 64% of California voters support keeping the independent redistricting commission. And I think this was one of the motivators behind Newsom trying to call for de-escalation this past week, because I think they likely saw that before it was published. So there is a risk that they could fail in this redistricting effort. I think what they're going to do here is what they have done in the past with these types of referendums is manipulate some of the language that's published in it to overcome this obstacle of support. And then I did see also the California Republicans are preparing a lawsuit that could also tie up this new map in the courts past the 2026 election.
Mm-hmm. So potentially tie California up while Texas, Ohio, and Florida move ahead.
Correct.
It seems to me like that could do it. I will tell you, just to reiterate here, the biggest risk from this is that this mid-decade redistricting plan in these red states enable Republicans to keep a House majority. If that happens, it's going to get a little bit Western in this country. And we are the next 2 years, if this does actually happen, which, Robert, above or below 50% of this happening here?
I think above 50%. The Republicans don't seem to be backing down. I think they also see themselves at a major advantage here, and they're going to exploit it.
It's going to be a long 2 years after the midterms if this does happen. And Robert, I'm inclined to agree with you that it is more likely than not. We'll see what happens in the midterms. It's still a long way away. All right, and then let's go ahead and continue, please.
So the Texas Democrats have confirmed that they're returning to Texas for Governor Abbott's second special session. They said this yesterday that once the California redistricting effort gets underway, which will be starting next Monday, they will be on their way back to Texas with enough of them to give a quorum in the Texas State House. And then speaking of this escalating fight, there was a Texas State Rep, Jeff Leach, yesterday. He said that Texas Republicans should consider redrawing not just the congressional district map, but also the state House and Senate maps to eliminate some Democrat-held state seats. And he also said that they should push to pass a new mid-decade map that would eliminate 9 to 10 Democrat-held congressional seats in response to California's announcement. So to me, it looks like Republicans could, if they follow Leach's urgings, attempt to quorum-proof the Texas State House and Senate after the 2026 election by redistricting these state-level seats. And I think this is likely to escalate this current fight to blue states engaging in another tit-for-tat over the control of state legislatures.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, and that would be big. And let me just say also something for Texas. Maybe the Texas state legislature does this, but you have to have a Speaker of the House willing to go to the mat on this. Our previous House Speaker was a Republican in name only, Dade Phelan. He sided with Democrats constantly. we won't even go into that. But Dusty Burrows, the current one, is, I don't know, iffy. So I do just want to point out, maybe Texas does this, but these rhinos that somehow keep the House speakership in the Texas state legislature, they wield an amazing amount of power, and they've just been siding with Democrats for so long, and no one understands why. I mean, literally nobody. These people hate Trump, and they've given Democrats they've enabled them to punch above their weight in Texas. Maybe that's coming to an end. We will see. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And let's move on here to this Japanese simulated strikes. All right. So back in June, Jared, you talked about these dual carrier operations. At first, you pointed out they're heading past Taiwan. This is very odd. They're going out in the Pacific. We don't see this very often. What you said, this was maybe not the first, but this was the first major dual carrier operations we've seen from China.
It was certainly the first in the Pacific. But one of the things I also said there was, hey, if I was going to run a carrier strike group interdiction mission, practicing that, Chinese strike group versus American strike group, this is how I do it. So sure looks like that. And Japanese government sources actually came out and said the same thing yesterday too, which was cool. So Forward Observer members got to hear that 2 months ago. So anyway, so the Japanese Defense Forces, they revealed that that Japan conducted anti-ship missile exercises against, but not on, China's Liaoning carrier in June. Now, let me help explain that a little bit. Japan's Air Self-Defense Forces sent multiple anti-ship cruise missile armed fighters. So they had the weapons on them to a non-standard exercise area. You can see it highlighted in yellow here, over the Liaoning's transit route after the Liaoning had transited to its own exercise area. So it was not in the area, but it was against that particular strike group. One government source that was speaking to Japanese media here, he said that given when and where it was conducted and what was involved, this training was clearly intended to make sure China gets the message that it was conducted as a countermeasure against them. Because the F-2 fighter is not a stealth fighter. It is meant to be seen. It's extremely combat capable, but is not stealthy. So they're sending a message to China. Now, these types of practical exercises, they provide extremely valuable information to Japan, the United States, all of their allies. And the reason it can even be translatable to their allies is the F-2 is actually a derivative of the F-16. The F-16 is used by South Korea and Taiwan, with some interest from the Philippines. But they also all run their own derivatives of the F-16, just like the F-2. So Taiwan's got it, South Korea's got it, the Philippines runs South Korea's derivative as well. The message sent here to China is not just Japan is preparing to fight war against China. Japan is preparing to help everybody else also be just as capable for fighting against China. This is a much broader message than what it looks like on its face. Now, I do want to point something out here that it concerns me. So they're careful to say, yes, the Liaoning transited in May. We ran the exercise in June, and they did everything but fire the weapon. But the Liaoning transited back in June. So, and there's no record of what Japanese ship was out there simulating the carrier that was supposed to be targeted. So I don't know how they would have conducted the targeting prior to firing. That leaves the possibility that the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force could have targeted the Liaoning while it was on the return transit. I think that is a very low likelihood because of the severe danger that puts everybody in. There's basically no misinterpretation of that. You just have to guess whether or not they're going to fire. That said, how did you conduct the targeting practice? If there's no ship there, how did you do it? Because you said it was successful. That's concerning to me that may have happened. I don't know whether it did or not. Just, I don't have another way to understand why Japan is saying it was successful if there was no target. That would raise tensions just through the roof, by the way, with China if they were targeted by a visibly armed set of fighters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sure seems like, one of the biggest things to watch here is misinterpretation of intentions. And at some point, Jared, it seems to me like maybe one of these Chinese ships could misinterpret something like this and maybe fire first, fearing that they're actually going to be struck. It seems to me like on an average day to day, pretty low. But one of the things you've talked about is when all these countries are running exercises in the same general area, like, yeah, it's open ocean, but look at the map. Looks like fairly tight spaces to me in some cases. The potential for an accident with major strategic effects that maybe starts World War III seems,
yeah.
Well, it's not necessarily high, but the risk is astronomical.
Yeah, anything higher than 0 to 1% is extremely concerning. Even if it's not high and it's a 5 to 10%, well, that's still not acceptable. And keeping in mind that, yeah, this map represents thousands of miles, but these operations are being run basically at or just outside of engagement range. That's not, it's still technically very crowded, and it is concerning because all it does take is, tensions to be high, like maybe you just were really embarrassed in a different theater of war, and now you have to prove a point, but you don't want to get hit. Well, if you're concerned about that, you're going to shoot first. I'll tell you right now, if the roles were reversed for like the U.S. Navy, if we saw a fighter coming out and we knew it was carrying weapons and it came at us in a bombing, if it came at us looking like it's going to shoot us and then turned on its radar, we're shooting you. Plain and simple. We're not taking that risk. I don't have any reason to believe China wouldn't do the same thing. In fact, I would expect them to as a professional Navy. And it's worth noting that the Japanese just came out like a week ago saying, hey, yeah, when we crossed over into China's territory and there was that big kerfuffle, they actually fired warning shots at us. So China has fired their warning shots. They're intended to miss, but they have used weapons to engage the Japanese very recently. They're not above it. This is concerning, but it is concerning, but at the same time, these lessons, I promise you, have already been proliferated. So they're going to be enacted by the rest of the allies. It's just a matter of, will we get the warning or not?
Mm-hmm. All right, Jared, thanks for that update. And before we move on to Q&A, it's Friday. It's the day that I publish the weekly economic outlook. This is economic early warning. So you can read, if this is a members only report, check out what major banks and hedge funds are saying and telling their clients, telling their private clients about the real shape of the economy, the real shape of the financial system, what's actually going on with the dollar here. They talk about the government debt time bomb. They talk about the extreme actions that the Treasury and Fed are going to be forced into. It is going to be bad for you. It's going to be painful for everyone. And this is not, YouTube hair on fire, world is ending guy. This is Goldman Sachs. This is JP Morgan. It's Deutsche Bank. It's these massive banks telling their clients, get ready. This stuff is coming. I talk about that every Friday. It's a members only report published Friday afternoon. Also, there's a lot of concern. It's almost every day we get questions about what's going on with the dollar. What's the state of the dollar? Our country's actually de-dollarizing. Well, what's great is when you actually have data, actual financial and monetary data that shows you exactly what's going on with the dollar. I put that in these reports. And so you can really get a much better picture of what's actually going on with the dollar system. It's one reason why I'm not in the near term, I'm not at all concerned about the dollar losing world reserve status, the dollar's not going to zero, et cetera. Over the long term, everyone should be very afraid. But in the short term, I'm not. That's coming out here on in this afternoon. Head over to FordObserver.com, sign up, check it out, and stay ahead of the curve on economic, financial, and monetary instability. All right, with that, we will go ahead and get to some questions here. Jared, we'll start with members' questions from our briefing room.
Absolutely. So Bad Wabbit wants to know, we know the cartels are working with China. That's an assumption. And we've seen China becoming more.
Well, there is some evidence to say China is working with the cartels. To what degree is debatable, and I think that's where things are more speculative. But for sure, we know they are. But in some cases, but go ahead.
Yeah, and we've seen China becoming more bold in the South China Sea. And regarding South America and Panama, does the deployment of a warship indicate the escalation of our gray zone warfare with China as a whole? And where do you see this going? This is referencing the reported naval assets moving down through the Caribbean Sea.
Mm-hmm. Well, we run counter narco ops, counter drug ops all throughout the Caribbean. And like you pointed out, typically that's a Coast Guard mission. Now the Navy's getting involved. Jared, you're the Navy guy. I don't see this as escalatory with China. It's definitely escalatory with the cartels. But what say you?
Yeah, basically the same. And as far as I know, the Chinese don't have anything deployed down there. It's usually a pretty big deal if they cross the second island chain. So, but I haven't seen anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Next question.
All right. From regular veteran, the younger generations seem to be moving right on the political spectrum. How do you see that impacting the color revolution over the next 3 years?
Sure. Well, let me preface this by saying broadly, we're looking at 3 phases over the next 3 years from these groups. Protest to resistance to revolution. We're at protest now. I think that movement is in preparation to cross into resistance. I'm not sure. The worst of that will definitely not be before the 26 midterms. I still think these groups are, I don't want to say they're trigger shy, but I don't think they want to be too disruptive because they don't want to lower Democrats' chances of winning in the midterms. And we're talking about mainstream establishment, progressive and social justice activist groups, et cetera. You know who they are. And then what they want to do is use a national resistance movement. So things like civil disobedience, direct action demonstrations, intervention, to wear down the legitimacy, capacity, and authority of the federal government, but really the Trump administration, to the point that they can elect a Democrat president. The revolution part is TBA. We're definitely going to see phase 1 and phase 2. Protest into resistance. It is happening. The revolution part may not happen. I don't think it is largely going to hinge on the state of the 2028 general election. If it's free and fair and they elect a Democrat, we will not see a color revolution. If Trump jokes about a third term, I think he's joking. But if a J.D. Vance or some other MAGA agenda president gets elected, that's going to substantially raise the risk that we actually will see a color revolution. I don't think they can, especially if somehow House Republicans hang on to the majority. We'll see. But if Democrats don't spike the Trump agenda in the midterms, it's going to be a long 2 years. That's the big message that I want to get across to everyone. It's going to be like 2017, maybe up to 2020 again from the midterms on. So with that in mind, let's talk about younger demographics. I'm not married to this, but my understanding is, it depends on how much value you put or how much weight you put in these polls. All the polling data I've seen says younger generations are way more open to socialism, and a majority have a favorable view of socialism. It was like in 2022, about 40%, maybe as high as 60% in a Cato Institute poll. I think it was from March of this year. It's like 62% of kids aged 18 to 29 have favorable views of socialism. So I look at the younger generation, and I think the white kids in Gen Z are far more conservative. But Gen Z is also far more diverse. And so I think this broadly probably breaks down by race and ethnicity. If you're white, you're probably more likely to be conservative, probably the most conservative generation at that age that we have seen in a long time. Non-whites probably skew towards the left. So I would have to do a much deeper dive, but how does this affect the color revolution? You've got, all these a lot of these color revolution were either student led, like you look at Otpor in Serbia. There are a lot of groups involved, but it was really the students that got involved, like these basically communist student movements. And so the challenge for the color revolution, if we do get there, is, it's like the pro-Palestine stuff. Obviously, young people on these college campuses are radical and revolutionary. And so I think if you can get them involved, then that's like the tip of the spear for your direct action. That's absolutely what they need. They've got to get young socialists / communists involved as the tip of the spear in the color revolution. And so we'll see. I hope that answers your question, but I think that's the way. I don't know how the younger people on the right, the Generation Z and the alphas will respond to that. But we could see street clashes again, certainly, like we saw in 2017, for instance. I hope that answers your question.
All right. Going to bring Robert on for this next one because it has to do with elections. So regarding color revolution, I've noticed that some Dem or liberal talking heads and congressional members are starting to talk about or adopt a law and order stance. If that side adopts law and order, do you believe they will cement a center or independent vote?
This is part of this larger schism in this fight over the Democratic Party, I believe, because there's basically still fighting over which direction the party is going to go. There are still people, I forget the name of that representative at the beginning of the year that got slammed by his party over some comments about why Trump won in November. He wanted the Democrats to take a more moderate position and move towards the center. And a lot, the problem they're facing is that a lot of the political infrastructure they have in like the Democratic National Convention, those have been kind of taken over by more progressive and left-wing members of the party, as we saw during the recent DNC official officer elections earlier this year. There are people in the Democratic Party that want that centrist movement, and some of them are actually voting with the Trump administration or with the Republicans on some of these law and order stuff like that police bill in the Senate that passed right before the recess. On the other hand, there are still a lot of progressive and left-wing parts of the Democratic coalition, like the Congressional Progressive Caucus, that still want to take the Democratic Party in a more left-wing direction. So I don't think it's if you're saying that, are they going to cement the center independent vote and flip everything in 2026 and 2028? I think that still remains to be seen, because this fight is going to be going on for a while, probably the next couple of election cycles before we figure out which side of this fight is going to come out on top.
All right, Jared, next question.
All right. With the increased pressure on cartels, do you see cartels attacking locally, like power, water, etc.?
I don't. Cartels want to make money. They don't want to get a lot of undue attention. That's how you get a lot of undue attention. Stay in drugs, stay in human trafficking, stay in money laundering, whatever, however they're making money. They just want to make money by and large. I mean, that's their primary goal.
All right.
And listen, that's not to say that there will be zero attempts or attacks, but I would just question, how do they make money from that? What do they get from that? If there's a way to make money for it, then yeah, maybe.
Okay. From James, how do we deal with local governments in blue states when counter protesting? Groups such as the Proud Boys.
Go ahead.
Groups such as the Proud Boys, even before January 6th, died out because they would get in fights with Antifa, and the cops would only target the right-leaning groups for arrest.
Yeah, I think the Proud Boys died out because they were largely, you had the J6 thing, which was kind of like the death knell. But, like the founder, Gavin McInnes, was forced to step away, kind of disavow them. There was never any strong national leadership. The Proud Boys were always kind of, yes, it was a national level organization in that there are chapters all across the country, but really it's kind of a parochial organization where you have membership and solidarity strongest at the local level. And yeah, they had meetups and they would join other states and do all these things. But there was not all their, you want to call it force projection or whatever. All of that happened at the local level. So with any time, one of the things that makes resistance effective is there's political top cover. You have the local politics, the local political landscape is either willing to tolerate or acquiesce to your disruptions. That was the big lesson learned in 2020. If you get arrested and you get spat back out the next day after spending a night in jail and the charges are dropped, you are free to go out and riot again. So in dealing with local governments in blue states, you've got to have good sheriffs. You've got to have a good mayor. You've got to have a good city council. You got to have people making decisions. And the right wing is just not a protest movement. I mean, we just don't see. Yes, we've seen protests, but it's just not the same level of community organizing like we've seen on the left. So, in terms of anything you want to do at the local level, you've got to have political cover. And when you do, you're able to get away with doing a lot more. When you don't, you're probably not going to get away with much. I think that's probably the bottom line.
All right. Also from James, with the recent attempted ship ramming by the PLAN, that's the Chinese Navy, is it now more likely that the PLAN aggression and incompetence will kick off a war before a deliberate attack on Taiwan? For the moment, I would say yes, just until, particularly from the PLA Navy, yes. That said, that does not mean I expect that to happen.
All right. Any other questions?
Yep. We are out of the ones from behind the paywall, so let's move over to YouTube.
All right. How much opportunity exists in other red states to gerrymander and increase their representation? So, Robert, we know a lot of these blue states are gerrymandered. They cannot get a lot of extra Democrat seats because they already have. But like Massachusetts, 38% Republican, 0 GOP seats. But for the red,
yeah.
Say again.
Many such cases, yeah. Looking at all of these maps.
But for red states, it seems like they could squeeze a lot out. So what's your outlook here?
I think the biggest next step for red states is that coming Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act Section 2, because that is the one that requires those majority minority districts. That might not come in time for 2026, but if they do, and they do seem to be hinting or the tea leaves say that they might strike this down, which means that some red states in the South, especially, but also I think Ohio could pick up additional Republican seats with new maps. Here in Florida, there's probably a couple of Democratic districts that could be gerrymandered out. So if Texas could actually get through a 10-seat map, I think there's at least another 5 to 10 seats throughout those red states, the VRA states in Florida that they could pick up as well.
Mm-hmm. And then if the Supreme Court rules against these majority minority districts, we're looking at Alabama, Louisiana, a couple other states have these by the court rulings. These states had to produce a black majority district for their representation. The Supreme Court says that's unconstitutional. Do you know how many seats this could potentially give Republicans?
I think I want to say at least 5, because I think it's Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana. Ohio was one of those states that was hit with that, and maybe Georgia.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then last, this is going to be interesting because next time there's a Dem trifecta, where if we do get there, I'm assuming we will eventually. Democrat president, Democrat House, Democrat Senate. And let me say that I'm not actually sold that we will continue to have a long future of free and fair elections. Obviously, I've said this many times. We're headed towards some form of autocracy or authoritarian government. I firmly believe that. But if there is a dim trifecta again, I mean, they've got to be passing these laws to overturn some of this stuff. What could a Democrat Congress and president do to make a law that can they do anything if the Supreme Court strikes this down? Is my question.
Well, they could try to pass another effectively another voting rights act if they have a trifecta. So looking at the long term, at least before we see how this gerrymandering fight plays out, the margin in the House and the Senate has just been shrinking over time to where you're talking a handful of seats can switch who has power. And in the Senate, that's important because they have a legislative filibuster. So if we did see a trifecta, I expect Democrats to kill the little legislative filibuster so they can pass something in the Senate with a simple majority. And so they could repass something like the Voting Rights Act to then require the majority minority districts again, phrase it in a different way that tweak it slightly so it's not running into that Supreme Court decision. They could also push this, they've talked a lot about this national level ban on extreme partisan gerrymandering. They could do something like that, require states to have independent redistricting commissions, but which I think in effect would be a benefit for them, because if you look at like California and New York, these independent, supposedly independent commissioning or commissions have pushed very heavily partisan Democrat maps. Like New York's the greatest example. They had this independent commission, and I think in 2022 they pushed a map that would have brought lean Republican districts down from like 7 to 2. And they were only stopped by the court, which said, well, this is just a little too far.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that. And yeah, maybe we could be maybe a little whiplash here. We'll see. All right, Jared, last question here. Sorry, I took it up. Listen, I think I watched this video. There's a professor is it King's College? I don't know, somewhere in the UK. And I think his name is David Betts, and he talked. He's really been making on the rounds. My YouTube feed it was nothing but David Betts for like weeks, because he was talking about the Civil War, potential for Civil War, and he's really been, I think, trying to warn many people and warn people about what's probably coming, and we're probably going to see. I won't say probably. You really never can tell. But I think we're trending towards multiple domestic conflicts, predominantly in like Western European countries, and then in the United States as well. And it's over a lot of things. I saw someone in the comments say that this is not about race. This is about class. And I think that's wrong. I think more and more this is about race. It will be more and more about race. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but I think the pendulum has swung too far in the other way, and it's like that little clacker thing. We're going to get a reversal, and it's going to go back the other way. This will be about race, especially in Western European countries. It will be about Native Europeans, Native Britons, Native German, whoever, whatever, versus the people are just very large populations that are destroying, in many cases, destroying the demographics of these countries. So class, of course, is going to be important, but it will be predominantly over race. So with that, that's my outlook. So listen, everyone. And by the way, those David Betts interviews are worth looking if you're up on YouTube. All right. Listen, we appreciate your support, everyone. That's going to do it for our Friday briefing. Wrap up the week as well. Thanks for your support. Head over to forwardobserver.com, sign up, support our mission, get our access to all the intelligence behind the paywall that's not on this show every day. And with that, we will be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.